Every December, the second biggest city in Colombia, Medellin, is lit up in a display so beautiful that the National Geographic voted it one of the top 10 places in the world to see Christmas lights. With its majority Catholic population, Colombia takes Christmas very seriously, and the festive season begins on the 7th of December with Little Candles Day, when small candles and paper lanterns decorate the country's windowsills, balconies, parks and roads. Christmas games are played and gifts given out, but the religious centre of Christmas is not lost, with the Novena Aguinaldos, a set of prayers, being recited alongside friends and family every day for 9 days, starting on the 15th of December. Each day, members of the community come together at a different home to pray and sing Christmas carols in a social event that honours the baby Jesus, Mary, Joseph and the Magi, who also went to a different place each night to seek shelter. When the praying is finished for the day, food is served, with natilla, a custard dish often served alongside other festive foods such as fried dough balls, known as buñuelos, being the most popular. All of this is to say that in Colombia, Christmas is a massive community event which brings people together to pray, eat, celebrate and love one another. However, from 1964 until 2012, this all had to happen on the backdrop of staggering brutality. Colombia is a country with vast natural resources, and yet it has long suffered from incredible inequality. The Colombian government spent much of the late 19th and early 20th century selling large tracts of land to private landowners to pay off its debts, and by the 1960s, 0.2% of farms owned 30% of farmland. This problem caused a significant amount of tension as peasants were forced off their land by powerful landowners, becoming internally displaced and having little legal recourse. In the late 1940s, Jorge Gaitan, a radical member of the Liberal Party, rose to prominence on a platform of fixing the issues Colombia had with its unequal land distribution, and many believed he would be elected in the 1950s election. He was incredibly popular and offered hope to a disenchanted, displaced peasantry. We do not know why, on the 9th of April 1948, Juan Roa Sierra chose to murder Gaitan, as he was quickly torn to pieces by an angry mob before anyone had the chance to ask. But the assassination of a figure who had brought so much hope to so many people triggered a 10-year period of extreme violence known as La Violencia, which culminated in an agreement between the Conservative and Liberal parties to rotate power, effectively locking all other political parties out of the political system. During La Violencia, groups of rebellious peasants had formed enclaves to protect themselves from the violence, and these groups were gradually radicalized and began to follow a communist ideology. In 1964, one of these independent republics, known as the Marquetalia Republic, was attacked by the Colombian government as part of Plan Lasso, a US-backed initiative to rid Latin America of any communist influences. The attack largely failed, and the peasants retreated to other enclaves, quickly reorganizing into a guerrilla group that later became known as the FARC, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. The conflict between the FARC guerrillas and the Colombian state continued essentially uninterrupted until the election of Belisario Etancur in 1982. The Colombians were tired of the conflict, and it fell to Etancur to attempt to make peace with the guerrillas, and he eventually managed to negotiate a ceasefire with the FARC in 1984. Negotiations through the year led to the creation of the Union Patriotica, or the UP, in 1985, a legal political party led by the FARC in the hopes that they might lay down their arms and approach revolution through the ballot box rather than the bullet. Despite fielding a presidential candidate through the UP, the FARC never laid down their weapons, and in 1987 their candidate was assassinated by death squads alongside thousands of UP party members. This signalled the end of Etancur and the FARC's attempts to reach a peaceful conclusion to the conflict. Throughout the 1990s, the FARC grew wealthier through largely illicit means such as kidnapping and the drug trade. This allowed them to increase their military activity, and the FARC's membership grew. By the late 90s, the FARC appeared to have the upper hand, as successful military endeavours caused the government to capitulate to more and more of their demands. The 90s also saw a huge increase in paramilitary activities, which, often backed by the Colombian state, were responsible for 80% of the violence against civilians throughout the entire conflict, massacring group after group of civilians that they considered to be guerrilla supporters. Throughout the early 2000s, huge numbers of civilians continued to be killed, mostly by paramilitary forces, but also by the FARC and the Colombian military. But then President Uribe took office in 2002. He disarmed the paramilitaries, largely ending their reign of terror by 2006, when 1,700 fighters surrendered their weapons in the town of Casibari. He also launched his Program for Humanitarian Attention to the Demobilized, which concentrated on convincing the FARC to demobilize by analyzing the lives of ex-FARC guerrillas in order to understand why they had joined the FARC and figure out how they might be convinced to stand down. It was realized that Christmas was one of the most popular times for FARC members to demobilize, so as December approached in 2010, the Colombian military launched Operation Christmas. 2 units in Black Hawk helicopters were sent over the jungle to scout supply paths which the guerrillas were known to use. They weren't looking for guerrillas themselves though, but trees. Eventually, they found an 82-foot high tree which stood along a path that the military knew guerrillas were sure to pass by. Wrapping 2,000 Christmas lights around it, they attached a motion sensor that would make it light up when guerrillas approached, and decorated it with a sign saying, "If Christmas can come to the jungle, you can come home." Then they went and did the same thing to 9 other trees. The plan was a huge success, seeing 331 guerrillas demobilizing whilst it was active, a 30% increase from the year before. This may not sound like much, but it was 5% of the total number of FARC guerrillas left. The operation was so successful that it was followed the next year by Operation Rivers of Light, where friends and relatives of guerrillas were asked to send a Christmas letter floating in an LED illuminated ball down rivers used by insurgents. This too was considered a success, and the FARC's numbers had begun to dwindle so much that they were forced to the negotiating table, announcing in February 2012 that they would no longer engage in extortive kidnappings as a gesture of goodwill to the Colombian government as the peace negotiations that had begun in the spring of 2011 continued. In November, the FARC announced a unilateral ceasefire until January 2013, and another from December 2013 until January 2014. Negotiations continued, and on the 24th of August 2016, a final agreement between the FARC and the Colombian government was announced. The FARC would lay down their arms and begin the process of rejoining civilian society, part of which was being guaranteed the right to safely form their own political party without the threat of being murdered, as had happened with the Union Patriotica. The Colombian government also agreed to reforms that would see the vast inequality in Colombia, which had only grown since the 1940s, addressed. The 297-page agreement was put to a referendum, which it failed to pass, with 50.2% of voters voting against it and 49.8% voting for it. Most of those who voted for it, it should be noted, were those who had been the most affected by the violence of the conflict, and those against tend to be those most insulated from the violence. The agreement was revised and approved by Congress on the 29th of November 2016, and peace, in writing at least, was finally achieved for Colombia. It would be great if I could say that this is the end of the story. A long and brutal conflict brought to a peaceful end by using Christmas to remind those fighting of what really matters: community, family and friends. Unfortunately, in 2018, President Ivan Duque was elected on a platform of opposition to the peace deal, and after the deaths of 500 social leaders and 150 guerrilla fighters between Duque's election and the 29th of August 2019, Ivan Marquez, the former second-in-command of the FARC, announced a new beginning to the armed struggle. Despite this, the former FARC first-in-command, Rodrigo Londoño, has stated that most former FARC members, including himself, remain committed to the peace deal, but the situation remains perilous for Colombians who wish for a permanent end to the violence that has plagued the country for decades. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see future content, and if you'd like to support the channel further, check out my Patreon in the description below. I'll see you next time.